The grand wedding hall glimmered with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed roses, ready to witness a fairy tale union. Or so everyone thought. All eyes sparkled with admiration for Vivian Crest, the radiant bride-to-be, the perfect daughter, and society's darling. She wore a custom-designed silk gown and smiled like royalty, basking in praises and compliments. Beside her stood Edward Hart, the cold and stoic CEO whose every move was tabloid-worthy. The press whispered about their match made in heaven, and the crowd could hardly wait for the vows. But one guest stood apart, Sarah Vale, hidden behind thick glasses, a dull dress, and her usual air of being invisible. She had always been the family's black sheep, the ugly duckling they never wanted in the spotlight. Sarah watched with quiet sadness, her heart cracking as Vivian whispered to her mockingly, "You'll never be more than a pity case." Then came the moment of truth. The officiant asked Edward if he would take Vivian as his wife. And Edward looked into the crowd, directly at Sarah. A gasp rippled through the crowd as Edward spoke words no one expected. "I choose Sarah Vale as my bride." Time froze. The air turned cold. The officiant stuttered, unsure of what to do, while Vivian's smile shattered into disbelief. "This isn't a joke, Edward," she screamed, clutching his arm, but he pulled away. Cameras clicked in a frenzy, catching every second of the scandalous twist. Sarah blinked in disbelief, her lips parting but no words forming. "Come here," Edward said firmly to her, extending his hand, not to Vivian, but to the girl everyone mocked. The world tilted as Sarah slowly walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Whispers turned into roars. "Why her? What is happening? Is this revenge?" Sarah stood next to Edward, trembling as the officiant awkwardly continued the ceremony with a different bride. Every word felt surreal as the vows were spoken and sealed with a kiss that never touched her lips but branded her soul. The reception turned chaotic, with guests unsure whether to celebrate or flee the scandal. Vivian stormed out, mascara streaming down her face, yelling that she would destroy them both. Edward remained expressionless, his grip on Sarah's hand unyielding. Sarah could feel eyes stabbing into her, every glance drenched with disbelief, jealousy, and hate. "Why me?" she finally whispered to him, but he said nothing, just held her hand like it was made of glass. And the world watched, waiting for the fall of the girl no one ever wanted. Behind closed doors that night, the mansion was suffocating in silence. Sarah sat alone in the massive bridal suite, her wedding gown too large for her frame, too beautiful for her to believe it was hers. She stared at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger, a clown draped in lace. The door creaked, and Edward entered, still in his suit, his tie loosened and eyes unreadable. "Why did you do this?" she asked again, this time with tears in her eyes. He approached, but she stepped back like a wounded animal. Was this revenge against Vivian? Or is this just another game? Her voice cracked, raw with confusion. "You chose the family joke to humiliate them, right?" Edward said nothing, only watching her like she was something more than even he could explain. "I don't understand," she sobbed, breaking at last. "Why me?" Edward finally spoke, voice low and sure. "Because they never saw you. But I did." Those words made something inside her stir, something fragile, something buried. But doubt clouded her faster than hope could settle. What did he see? She wondered. The world had only ever seen her as a stain on the family name, a burden, a blemish. Now, married to the man her stepsister was supposed to have, she was the scandal of the year. "I want answers," she said, wiping her tears, determined to regain dignity. But Edward only walked to the window, gazing out into the dark. "You'll understand soon enough," he replied. And with that, the mystery of her new life began. Not with love, but with confusion, betrayal, and unanswered questions. The morning after the wedding, the headlines exploded with scandal. CEO marries ugly duckling. Vivian Crest dumped at the altar. Mystery bride revealed. Paparazzi flooded the streets outside Edward's mansion, desperate for a photo of the girl who stole the perfect life. Inside, Sarah sat at the edge of the bed, clutching the sheets like they were her last shield. Her phone vibrated endlessly with missed calls and cruel messages, her own family disowning her publicly. Her mother called her an embarrassment. Her stepfather accused her of orchestrating everything for attention. Meanwhile, Vivian held a press conference in tears, claiming Sarah had manipulated Edward and stolen her future. "She's always been jealous of me," Vivian sobbed into the cameras. "She's not right in the head." The world ate it up. Every cruel word painted Sarah as a villain in her own tragedy. Edward remained silent through it all, refusing to clarify the truth to the media. Sarah confronted him in the study, her voice shaking as she demanded he speak out. "They're calling me a homewrecker. A snake. You just let it happen." He turned from his desk, calm as ever. "Let them talk. Their voices don't change your worth." His words were kind, but they felt hollow without action. "Don't you care what they're doing to me?" she cried, tears spilling freely now. Edward stepped closer, brushing a tear from her cheek. "What they say now won't matter when the truth comes out." But Sarah didn't know what that truth was, or how much more humiliation she could take before breaking. At dinner that evening, the silence between them was sharp enough to cut flesh. Sarah barely touched her food, her appetite devoured by shame. "You knew what this would cause," she said finally. "You knew I'd be their target." Edward sipped his wine unmoved. "I did." She stared at him, betrayed all over again. "Then why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you prepare me?" He placed his glass down slowly, his eyes softer now. "Because if I told you everything, you would have run away." That sentence lingered like smoke in the air. And I couldn't let that happen. Vivian's wrath took physical form the next day, when she stormed into the mansion uninvited. "Give me back what's mine," she shrieked, slapping Sarah across the face before anyone could stop her. Sarah staggered, clutching her cheek, heart pounding with humiliation as the staff looked on. "You're nothing. You were always nothing," Vivian screamed. "Edward's mine. He was always supposed to be mine." Edward arrived just in time to pull Vivian away. "You'll never set foot in this house again," he said coldly, dragging her out. But the sting on Sarah's cheek lingered longer than his protection. It wasn't just the pain, it was the shame of being treated like dirt in her own home. She went to her room in silence, locking the door, burying her face in a pillow soaked with tears. That night, Sarah opened her laptop and stared at the folders no one else knew existed. Her hands hovered over files filled with secrets, code she had written, diagnoses she had solved, fortunes she had rescued. She had always hidden her true self, believing no one would ever value her mind when they hated her face. But now the world had pushed her too far. She couldn't cry forever. She had to rise. Not for revenge. Not for Edward. But for herself, for the girl they tried to erase. "You want a villain?" she whispered to the screen, eyes burning with resolve. "I'll give you a miracle instead." The media frenzy hadn't slowed down. In fact, it had only grown. Rumors twisted tighter, painting Sarah as a manipulative gold digger who schemed her way into Edward's world. Her own family had publicly denounced her, claiming they never supported her odd behavior. Strangers online called her delusional, ugly, a parasite. But behind the curtains, Sarah was building something no one expected. In a hidden lab beneath Edward's estate, once abandoned and dust-covered, Sarah booted up a secret network. Screens flickered to life as her AI system recognized her voice. "Welcome back, Dr. Vale." The title stabbed at her like a bittersweet reminder. In the world's eyes, she was a nobody. But here, she was something more, a silent genius, a healer, a billionaire ghost. Sarah began to revive old projects she once shelved out of fear. Her medical AI, designed to diagnose rare diseases in seconds, was now more advanced than anything on the market. Her digital appraisal tool for luxury artifacts, once laughed at by her stepfather, was secretly used by global collectors. She even had a portfolio under a pseudonym that had turned $2,000 into $30 million in 2 years. No one knew, because Sarah had never needed the spotlight to succeed, just space to breathe. But now, something inside her demanded more. Not revenge, Not even validation. Just the truth, raw, unfiltered truth, that she had never been what they said she was. She wasn't weak. She wasn't ugly. And she definitely wasn't stupid. Edward noticed the change in her before she even said a word. He found her one evening, working in silence as holograms flickered around her like magic. "What is all this?" he asked, eyes narrowing with interest. "The part of me no one cared to see," she replied, not turning to face him. He stepped forward, watching her code with awe and hesitation. "You've been hiding this?" She finally looked up. "No. I was surviving. There's a difference." Her voice was steady, not bitter, but her eyes shimmered with pain. For once, Edward didn't know what to say. He just stood there, watching a woman he thought he knew become someone even he couldn't define. The turning point came when Sarah submitted a medical breakthrough anonymously to a top journal. A patient, a child on the brink of death, was saved overnight thanks to her algorithm. The media caught wind of a mystery genius revolutionizing healthcare. Hospitals began to whisper her alias, Dr. Evra. When her family saw the news, they mocked it, until investors pulled out of her stepfather's company, accusing him of turning away a prodigy. Vivian's cosmetics brand was hit by scandal when Sarah's anonymous AI revealed their formula contained banned ingredients. Piece by piece, the lies began to crumble. But still, no one connected the dots to Sarah. Not yet. At dinner that night, Sarah sat across from Edward, her posture more upright, her eyes less fearful. He poured wine for both of them and raised his glass. "To the woman the world didn't deserve," he said quietly. She raised hers too, but her lips didn't smile. "They'll never apologize," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But they'll remember you." She stared into her glass, seeing not herself, but the girl who cried in silence for years. That girl was dying, and from her pain, a new woman was rising. "Then let them remember everything," Sarah said. "Especially the part where I stopped waiting for their approval." The silence between them had changed. It wasn't cold anymore, just heavy with unanswered questions. Sarah sat on the balcony, the wind tugging softly at her robe as the night sky spilled stars above her. Edward joined her, setting down 2 cups of tea, his presence calm but unreadable as always. "You haven't asked me," he said. She turned her head, her gaze sharp. "Asked what?" He stared into the darkness. "Why I married you." The question had haunted her for days, but her pride had kept it buried. Now, with the truth inches away, it felt too big to speak. "Because you wanted to humiliate Vivian?" she asked, forcing her voice to sound casual. Edward chuckled bitterly. Vivian was never the target. Sarah blinked, unsure whether to believe him. "Then why?" she asked again, softer this time. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I saw you once. Years ago. You were sketching designs for a prosthetic hand in a hospital waiting room. You were talking to a child who had just lost his arm, showing him how it would work." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She remembered that day vividly, but never knew anyone was watching. "You told him he could still be a hero," Edward continued. "That his scars made him stronger." Sarah looked down, her heart twisting. "You remembered that?" Edward nodded slowly. "I remember everything that matters." The confession unraveled something inside her, but it didn't erase the pain. "Then why let them treat me the way they did for years?" she asked, voice laced with hurt. "You saw me and you stayed silent." Edward's jaw tightened. "Because I needed you to survive long enough to see yourself." The words weren't comforting. They were infuriating. "I didn't need a savior," she snapped. "I needed someone who gave a damn." Edward didn't respond, and the silence roared between them again. Finally, Sarah stood, her robe flowing like a cape in the wind. "I'm not your project. I'm not your redemption. I'm just someone who deserved better." And with that, she walked inside, tears stinging her eyes but pride holding her head high. The next day, Sarah found herself alone at a charity gala Edward couldn't attend. She wore a black velvet dress, no makeup, no glitter, just her natural self. Whispers followed her every step. "She's the one." How did she trap Edward Hart? She's not even that pretty. The old humiliation tried to creep back in, but Sarah didn't flinch. She stood straight, smiled gracefully, and introduced herself as Sarah Vale, independent entrepreneur. An old classmate approached her, Melissa, who used to mock her mercilessly. "You look different," Melissa said, clearly fishing for weakness. Sarah smiled kindly. "No, you're just finally seeing clearly." But while Sarah held her ground publicly, her heart still wavered privately. That night, she returned home to find a letter on her desk. Edward's handwriting was unmistakable. "If I hurt you by waiting too long to speak, I regret it every day. But I will never regret choosing you." She read it twice, tears slowly tracing her cheeks. Then her phone buzzed. It was Edward. "Come to the garden." She stepped outside and found the entire yard lit with soft lights and blooming white lilies. Edward stood under the archway where they first said, "I do." This time, there was no audience. No cameras. No pretense. "You're right," he said as she approached. "You didn't need saving. But maybe I did." The internet broke when someone leaked Sarah Vale's identity as the mastermind behind the life-saving medical AI. The name Dr. Evra was no longer a mystery. It was her. Forums erupted with disbelief. "Wait, the ugly bride is that genius? No way she developed that alone. She must have stolen someone's work." The world wasn't ready to admit that the girl they mocked had built what others could only dream of. Instead of praise, Sarah was met with attacks, suspicion, and even demands for her credentials. She held a press conference to confirm it. In a simple black suit, no makeup, no frills. "Yes, I'm Dr. Evra," she said, looking into every camera lens with quiet fire. "And no, I don't owe anyone proof of the hours I bled for this." But the world hated being wrong, especially about someone they discarded. Vivian wasted no time launching a smear campaign. She accused Sarah of stealing tech from her fiancé, fabricating her qualifications, and sabotaging her cosmetics line with fake data. With her crocodile tears and high society support, Vivian easily manipulated public sympathy. "She's dangerous," Vivian sobbed on live television. "She was always jealous of me. I was the one meant to be Edward's wife." Sarah watched the broadcast from her home, numb and disgusted. But her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sting of being betrayed again. She had spent her life hiding her brilliance to avoid attention. Now being seen felt like a curse. "They won't believe me," she whispered to Edward. "They already chose their hero, and it's not me." Edward wrapped his arms around her, his voice firm against her shaking form. "Then we won't give them a choice." He filed a lawsuit against Vivian's brand for defamation and malicious interference, exposing her use of banned chemicals in her products. Secret emails were leaked, revealing that Vivian had bribed testers and silenced whistleblowers. The narrative flipped again, this time violently. "Vivian Crest lied to us. Sarah Vale was telling the truth all along." But the damage wasn't easily undone. Sarah's face, once mocked, was now a meme. People online either worshipped her or dissected her like a science experiment. No one just let her be. She was never allowed peace. Only performance. Sarah's mother reached out next, not with love, but desperation. "We didn't know, sweetheart," she lied over the phone. "We're so proud of you now. Please come to dinner." Her stepfather promised to make amends, blaming the media for twisting everything. But Sarah knew better. These were the same people who once left her crying in the attic on Christmas while Vivian opened diamond bracelets. "You only love me now that the world does," she said, her voice sharp with clarity. "But I'm not coming back. I don't need your love anymore." And with that, she hung up for the first time, choosing herself over the illusion of family. That night, Edward found her in the library, sitting on the floor in her old pajamas, surrounded by books. She looked at him with teary eyes and a small, exhausted smile. "I used to pretend I lived in one of these stories," she said, "where the girl no one believed in turned out to be everything." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "You didn't need a story," he whispered. "You are the story." She rested her head on his shoulder, finally letting the walls down. And in that quiet, book-scented room, with the world still spinning outside, Sarah Vale allowed herself to feel something she hadn't in years: peace. Just for a moment. Just long enough to remember who she really was. Vivian was no longer a fallen princess. She was a woman consumed by vengeance. After losing her cosmetics empire, media clout, and public favor, she vanished from the spotlight, but only to reemerge with a plan so cruel it would break Sarah from the inside. The first strike was subtle. A doctored video surfaced online, showing Sarah seemingly mocking disabled patients during one of her AI development sessions. It was grainy, low quality, but enough to spark outrage. Hashtags demanding her resignation trended globally. "This is how she really thinks," people cried. The public that once celebrated her now spat venom. Sarah stayed silent for a day, then 2, then 3. She didn't want to give Vivian the attention, but inside, her heart was cracking. Edward fought harder this time, hiring the best forensic analysts to prove the video was fabricated. But damage in the age of the internet couldn't be undone by logic alone. Sponsors began pulling support. Media outlets distanced themselves. And in private, Sarah crumbled. "I tried to save lives," she whispered to herself in the dark, curled up on the floor of her lab. "Why does the world keep punishing me for breathing?" Her team, loyal, silent, and devastated, rallied behind her, but even they couldn't stop the flood of hate. Meanwhile, Vivian staged another appearance, pretending to speak out despite being legally warned. Her words dripped poison. "I don't want her hurt," she said sweetly. But maybe now she understands the consequences of stepping out of place. Sarah's old professors, once proud of her, issued neutral statements, too cowardly to defend, too greedy to burn bridges. It was a new kind of humiliation, not loud like before, but slow and suffocating. Even strangers on the street began to point, whispering, sneering. One day, as she exited a charity clinic, a woman threw coffee on her dress and screamed, "You're a fraud." Cameras caught it all. The image went viral. And just like that, Sarah was once again the girl with no allies, standing alone in a world that didn't want her truth. That night, Edward found her staring into her bathroom mirror, hands trembling, makeup washed away. "I hate this face," she whispered. "Even when they know the truth, they still choose to hate me." He stepped behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders, his reflection in the mirror steady. "Then let them hate. They don't deserve your love anyway." But Sarah didn't want to be hated anymore. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to exist. And that was when she realized something terrible. "Vivian won't stop until I'm gone," she said quietly. "And maybe that's what she wants me to believe." Her eyes, once full of fire, now glistened with resolve. Not for revenge, not even for survival, but for healing, for herself. "I'm done playing the villain or the miracle," she whispered. "From now on, I'm just going to be me." Sarah held a private press conference the next morning, not for sympathy but for truth. She presented undeniable evidence of the video's manipulation and publicly challenged Vivian to undergo legal arbitration. Her voice was steady, her stance unshaken, her words sharp. "This is not just about me," she said to the reporters. "This is about every woman who was silenced because she didn't fit your definition of likable." The room went still. Her scars, her intelligence, her vulnerability, they were no longer weaknesses. They were armor. And the world didn't know what to do with a woman it couldn't define, especially one who refused to apologize for shining. The photo that shattered the world's delusion wasn't meant to be released. It was a candid image, taken by Edward, quietly, during a morning when Sarah had fallen asleep on the couch with files scattered around her, her face bare, vulnerable, breathtaking. No filters, no glamour, just her. When Edward leaked the image to the media, it wasn't a PR move, it was defiance. "This is the woman you mocked," he wrote in the caption. "No makeup. No illusion. Just brilliance." The image went viral within minutes. Comments flooded in. "That's her? She's stunning. We were lied to. Some people apologized. Most didn't. But the ones who once called her ugly began changing their tune. A world obsessed with surface finally choked on its own judgment. Sarah wasn't thrilled about the leak. In fact, she was furious. "You turned me into a symbol," she hissed at Edward, storming into his office. "I wanted to be seen for my work, not my face." Edward stood calmly, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I know." But they were too blind to see anything else. Sometimes, to make them listen, you have to show them what they fear most. She paused, breath shallow. "And what's that?" He stepped closer. "A woman they underestimated." She looked away, arms crossed. They'll still twist it. "Let them," he said. "You're not here to please them. You're here to break them, with the truth." Her face now graced magazines, but for the first time, not as a punchline. Headlines read, "Sarah Vale, the beauty behind the brain." How we got it so wrong. Some still tried to shame her, twisting her success into scandal. But Sarah refused to react anymore. She focused on rebuilding. She reopened her free health clinics, launched a scholarship for underprivileged STEM students, and released a new AI tool that could detect diseases in children before symptoms appeared. The same people who doubted her were now begging for partnerships. But she remembered. She remembered every headline, every betrayal, every silence when she cried alone. Forgiveness was not forgetfulness. Meanwhile, Vivian was spiraling. Her lies unraveled one by one. The final blow came when leaked audio of her boasting about destroying Sarah surfaced. She had laughed cruelly. She was always so desperate for love. All I had to do was take it away. The public turned viciously on her. Brand deals dropped. Lawsuits filed. Her reputation, once pristine, burned to ashes. And Sarah? She never said a word about it publicly. Her silence became the loudest revenge. For once, Vivian was the one begging for mercy, and no one was listening, because the world had finally seen the truth. And it was beautiful, raw, and named Sarah Vale. One night, Sarah returned home late from a community lecture. She stood in front of her mirror again. Same eyes, same scars, same soul. She no longer flinched. She no longer cried. She traced her cheekbones softly and whispered, "They tried to bury me with their shame." A pause. But I was always soil, not the seed. Edward entered the room behind her, leaning on the doorframe. "The world's catching up," he said gently. "I never needed them," she replied. "I just needed to remember I was enough." For the first time, she believed it. It began with a locked drawer in Edward's office. Sarah wasn't snooping. She was searching for a file for the AI patent attorney when she accidentally knocked the drawer open. Inside, she found a stack of letters, each one sealed, dated, and addressed to her. Her fingers trembled as she opened the first one. October 17th. "You cried today after Vivian humiliated you in front of your classmates. I wanted to step in. I didn't. And I hate myself for it." Sarah sat down slowly, heart pounding. These weren't just letters, they were confessions. Years of silent guilt poured out in Edward's careful handwriting. "You were brilliant even when no one looked. I watched you fix that robotic leg in secret while others mocked your clothes." She didn't know whether to feel betrayed or broken. One by one, she read them. Some were short, single-line apologies. Others spanned pages, detailing events she had long buried, moments when Edward had witnessed her suffering from afar but done nothing. "You deserved someone who spoke up, not someone who stayed behind the glass." There were even letters written during their engagement. "I'm marrying you today. And even though I know you think it's out of pity or spite, I swear it isn't. I want you to hate me now, if it means you'll grow stronger. I don't deserve you yet, but I will someday." Sarah clutched the page to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't know if it was too late for forgiveness, or if she even wanted to give it. That night, she confronted Edward in the kitchen. He stood at the stove, cooking her favorite soup. She held the bundle of letters in her hands, her voice shaking. "You were watching the whole time," she said. "Watching me drown, and doing nothing." Edward turned, guilt already in his eyes. I was a coward. I thought you'd rise on your own. I didn't want to taint your victories with my help. Sarah's anger simmered beneath her sadness. You let me believe no one cared. I cried alone for years. He stepped forward, softly. I never stopped caring. I just didn't think I deserved to show it. Her lips trembled. I don't know if I can forgive you. He nodded. Then I'll earn it every day until you can. In the following days, she found herself rereading the letters late at night. Strangely, they didn't make her angrier, they made her see. Edward hadn't just fallen in love with her after her transformation. He had loved her through every painful chapter. But his love had been wrapped in silence and shame. In one letter, he wrote, You once told a patient that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means living anyway. I hope one day you live and maybe you let me live beside you. Sarah wept that night, not because she was broken, but because the girl who was once discarded had finally been seen. Truly seen. She didn't answer Edward for a while. But one morning, she left a single note on his desk. No signature. Just a sentence in her handwriting. Maybe you can stay. And it was enough. Not forgiveness. Not closure. Just a beginning. And sometimes that was all two broken people needed to start again, where the pain had once ended. The charity gala was meant to be a quiet affair, just another evening of small talk, fundraising, and camera flashes. Sarah wore a sleek silver gown, elegant but simple, her face bare except for a faint shimmer of gloss. She'd promised herself not to draw attention tonight. But the room froze when the doors opened and he walked in. Elias Thorne, her ex-fiancé. The man who once left her in tears at the university auditorium steps, saying, You'll never be enough for someone like me. He was in a tuxedo, hair slicked back, with a polished grin, and a woman clinging to his arm. But when he saw Sarah, he stopped breathing. Elias's companion, some socialite clout chaser, clung tighter when she realized where his eyes were fixed. Sarah stood tall, the soft chatter of the room like static behind her. He approached slowly, cautiously, like a man walking toward a wildfire. Sarah, he said with forced charm, you look unrecognizable. She smiled politely. And you look exactly the same. The air between them thickened with the weight of unspoken regrets. I've been meaning to reach out, he added. Everything happening with Vivian, your success, it's been unbelievable. I just wanted to say I was wrong. His voice dropped to a whisper. You were always more than enough. Edward had seen the exchange from across the room. His jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. This was her battle. Her past. Sarah stared at Elias, years of humiliation and heartbreak flashing through her mind. The whispers in college, the cruel laughter, the pitying glances. You left me when I needed you most, she said, voice firm but steady. I thought I would die from that heartbreak. Elias swallowed. I was scared. Everyone told me you were just a phase, that you weren't worth the risk. Her lips curled, bittersweet. And now you're chasing what you once discarded. But I'm not chasing anything anymore. I am the prize. The room erupted with applause, not staged, not scripted, but from those who had heard every word. Later that night, Edward joined her on the rooftop garden, quiet and glowing under fairy lights. He didn't ask about Elias. He didn't need to. Sarah turned to him, leaning on the railing. He came back because the world loves me now. A pause. But you stayed when no one did. Edward didn't respond with words. He took her hand, lifted it to his lips, and kissed her knuckles softly. And in that moment, the air between them shifted. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about love that endured silence, shame, and time. Before they went inside, Sarah whispered something so faint the wind almost stole it. I never needed him to say sorry. I just needed me to stop believing he was right. Edward wrapped an arm around her shoulders as they walked back into the gala. Her head held higher, her heart finally free. And behind them, the past dissolved like mist. Just when Sarah thought she could breathe again, the sky darkened once more. A breaking headline shook the digital world. Sarah Vale's degree fake? Screens everywhere flashed with supposed proof that her academic records were forged, her credentials invalid, her AI achievements stolen from unnamed interns. The world turned on her in a blink. Clients paused partnerships. Universities launched formal investigations. News anchors looked gleeful as they replayed the accusations. Edward immediately ordered their legal team into overdrive. But deep inside, Sarah sat frozen in her office, staring at the screen. "Not again," she murmured. "Why do they always believe the worst about me first?" Vivian had planned this well, her last act of vengeance. A falsified trail of emails, a forged thesis rebuttal from a long-retired professor, even a fake witness who claimed he wrote half of her AI code. It was more elaborate than anything she'd done before. And the worst part? The public wanted to believe it, because it made the world feel right again. The beautiful, powerful woman had to be a fraud. Sarah didn't cry this time. She didn't scream. She simply sat in silence. "I built everything on truth," she whispered. "But lies are louder." Edward kneeled beside her, holding her hand.
"Not anymore," he said.
"This time, we burn the lies down." He flew in her professors, brought receipts, timestamps, recordings, everything. They hosted a live stream with industry experts and university leaders. Edward even exposed Vivian's secret payments to journalists and sources. The world watched in real time as the narrative unraveled. Sarah stood on that live stream and said, "I don't owe this proof to the people who cheered my downfall. I give it for every young girl building her dream in silence, so no one dares to question her worth again." Tears slipped down her cheek. Not from defeat, but from vindication. By the end of the stream, the hashtag Sarah was always real was trending worldwide. Vivian's world collapsed overnight. Arrest warrants were issued. Her sponsors sued her for breach of contract. She tried to flee but was caught trying to board a plane under a false identity. The media that once adored her now shredded her reputation. Meanwhile, Sarah stayed silent. No celebration. No public gloating. Only healing. She returned to her clinic, her lab, her students. She spoke at women's tech summits and opened a free legal aid program for falsely accused whistleblowers. "Truth is a slow burn," she told them, "but it never dies." For the first time in years, she slept through the night. But something else changed, too. Edward knelt again, this time with no plan, no pretense, just a velvet box in his palm. "Not because I want to fix the past," he whispered, "but because I want to build a future where no one ever makes you doubt your worth again." Sarah's eyes filled, not with doubt, but something deeper.
Trust.
Healing.
Love.
She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned down, pressed her forehead to his, and whispered, "Let me come back to life first." He nodded. Because love, real love, waits for no applause, but always waits for healing. The sun rose quietly that morning, casting gold against the frost-laced windows of Sarah's apartment. It had been 3 days since Edward's proposal, and the velvet box still sat unopened on her bedside table. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. For the first time, the decision wasn't clouded by fear, manipulation, or obligation. It was hers. Entirely hers. She stood in front of the mirror, not to check her face, but to speak to herself. "Not for them. Not for him. Not for revenge," she whispered. "For me." Her reflection didn't flinch anymore. The woman staring back at her was no longer the fragile girl who begged for love in silence. Outside, the media had shifted. The same journalists who once called her a fraud were now calling her a legend. Documentaries were in the works. Universities wanted her to give keynote speeches. Billion-dollar corporations were lining up, begging for partnerships. But Sarah didn't answer any of them. Not yet. She had started visiting her childhood home again, a modest, forgotten place filled with dust and the memory of her late mother. She sat on the porch with a thermos of tea, remembering when she used to hide there after Paige's bullying. Remembering the tiny voice that said, "Maybe one day, someone will see you." That day had come. But the little girl inside her still needed to be held. So she held her. Edward visited, but he didn't push. He brought warm food and quiet company. They didn't talk about proposals or weddings. They just existed, two souls scarred by silence, learning how to be whole. One evening, as they shared dinner in the small kitchen, Edward finally asked, "Do you ever wonder, what if none of it had happened? No betrayal, no humiliation, just an ordinary life." Sarah thought for a moment. "If none of it happened, I wouldn't know who I am." She smiled faintly. "I don't regret the pain. I only regret how long I believed I deserved it." Edward reached for her hand. "You never did. Not for a second." She squeezed his fingers. "I know that now." That week, Sarah made the choice the world had been waiting for. Not a headline, not a scandal, but a decision. She would step away from the limelight. Not forever, but long enough to rediscover what joy felt like without a spotlight. She quietly sold a portion of her AI patents to fund an initiative for women in tech and healthcare. She stepped down from public CEO duties, appointing young leaders she had mentored. "They deserve to rise without having to bleed for it," she said during her farewell speech. There was no grand exit, just grace. She didn't disappear. She reclaimed her silence, on her terms. But on the eve of her departure from public life, she visited one final place, Vivian, now in a rehabilitation center. The room was sterile, and Vivian looked tired, pale, aged beyond her years. They hadn't spoken since the arrest. When Sarah entered, Vivian looked away. "You came to gloat?" she muttered. Sarah shook her head. "I came because once I loved you like a sister." Vivian's eyes filled, but she blinked them away. "I don't deserve it." "No," Sarah agreed. "But neither did I." She stood silently for a moment, then turned to leave. "I forgive you," she whispered at the door. "But I'll never forget what you taught me. That sometimes the only way to win is to walk away whole." The first snowfall came quietly. No headlines, no fanfare, just the gentle hush of white layering over the city that once mocked her. Sarah stood beneath the snow-covered pergola of the medical innovation retreat she had founded in the mountains, far from the flashing lights, the cameras, and the courtroom chaos that once defined her life. The center was peaceful. Young minds roamed the halls. Women who once thought their voices would never matter now led departments. She watched as one girl adjusted her prosthetic arm, designed by a team trained under Sarah's program. This was the future she had always wanted. Not the applause, but the change. Letters came every week, from girls across the globe. Some handwritten, tear-stained. Some emailed, filled with stories of survival. "I saw myself in you," they all wrote. "You made me believe again." And in her quiet moments, Sarah read them all. She kept them in a box labeled proof. Proof that she hadn't just healed bodies, but souls. Edward visited often, sometimes to speak at conferences, sometimes just to make her laugh over cocoa by the fireplace. They were still not married. She still hadn't opened the velvet box. But he never asked again. Instead, he loved her in the silences. With loyalty, with stillness, with patience. One evening, as the sky turned lavender and the fire crackled, Edward sat beside her on the couch. "Do you miss the noise?" he asked. "The interviews? The world watching?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "I don't miss being watched. I only miss the part where I used to hope they'd love me." She looked at him. "But I've stopped hoping for that. I love me now. That's enough." He reached for her hand and held it gently. "You always deserve to feel that." A soft pause passed between them, filled with warmth. Then Sarah turned, finally, and whispered, "Edward, open the box." His hands trembled as he placed the small velvet case on her palm. She opened it slowly. It was simple, a gold band, delicate, with the smallest diamond at the center. Understated, just like the quiet strength she had become. She looked at it for a long moment, then smiled. "This time not because the world demands a title, but because I choose it." Edward's eyes shimmered with tears. "And I choose you," he whispered. They didn't plan a wedding. No press. No audience. Just a private vow beneath the same tree where she had once broken down in tears years ago. For every moment I let you suffer alone, Edward said, I promise to walk beside you from now on. Sarah smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. And for every time I doubted my worth, I now carry the truth in my name. Years later, the world still remembered the scandal, the betrayal, the twist at the wedding that shook the nation. But more than that, they remembered her. The woman who rose from ashes not just once, but over and over again. The woman whose silence had once been mistaken for weakness. The woman they never saw coming. Sarah Vale became more than a symbol. She became a movement. An anthem. A whisper passed from survivor to survivor. If she could, so can I. And in the quiet of the night, when snow fell gently against the glass of her mountain home, Sarah would light a candle, close her eyes, and remember the girl who once waited to be chosen. Only now, she'd whisper something different. You are already enough. Even if no one claps.